episodes recently received a lot of feedback and engagement across social media. They were my episode titled, Are Women Afraid to Vote Differently Than Their Husbands? And my episode, Men Aren't Protectors. And I have to say, after reading through the comments in the spirit of always trying to be intellectually honest here, I've decided I need to issue corrections on what I got wrong for these videos. First, I'm Hannah Cox with Base Politics. Welcome to my channel where I bring you my politically homeless takes on politics and culture. Before we dive in today, make sure you like the video, subscribe to my channel if you have not already, and of course, ring the notification bell so you never miss one of my episodes. Okay, so we are going to break this in segments. I want to talk about what I got wrong in each of these videos. So to kick it off, we will dive in to the feedback on my video, Men Are Not Protectors, which I stand by. In this episode, I examine the data and the anecdotal evidence that shows women are far more likely to intervene in threatening situations and protect other women compared to men. I also discuss the arguments that feminism has killed chivalry and some men's stubborn refusal to understand the differences in critiques against toxic masculinity versus criticisms of masculinity as a whole. In this episode, I allege that the mythical feminist who gets mad when you open the door in public caricature is a rare bird that reveals itself only to men and which I have never encountered. And the point in me saying this is that I largely just did not believe men to be telling the truth when they said this was something that they experienced, because I have encountered so many women in my life, including many feminists who are more rad femme than I am, and I have yet to meet a woman who hates chivalry. But after hearing from enough quality men whose experiences I believe, it seems I have to admit I was wrong on this front. Let's go to the comments. First up, we have this one that says, can't speak for all men, but in my case, I have been accused of being creepy for offering to help a woman who seemed in distress enough times that I simply don't offer help anymore. And for the record, this is not simple things like holding a door. I do that all the time for men and women. I mean asking a woman in a bar if an actually creepy guy is bothering her, or stopping and offering help on the side of the road in cases where the help is unsolicited. I think the women feel like I'm trying to prey on them by pretending to help. Unfortunately, he might be right on this. I think women who tend to watch a lot more true crime are very well aware that actually sometimes the bad guys do pose as the hero, particularly in situations where you are alone and vulnerable. So I'm really, really sorry to hear that he had these experiences. But as I reflect upon them more, I try to think how I would respond. I'm kind of a different breed because I believe in self-protection and I carry. So if I was broken down the side of the road and a man offered to help me, I think I would be more likely to view it in a positive, well-meaning light, but I also would have that backup, which is why all women should carry. Another person said, when I was in grad school a few years ago, I had dinner with a woman at a restaurant near campus. I kid you not, when I tried to pull a chair out for her, she stopped me and said, I can get my own chair. I'm empowered. Oh my gosh, the cringe. The cringe. I can't even, I would melt into a pile of salt if a woman said something like that in front of me. He went on to say, I knew dinner was going to be interesting, LOL. I said, I think dinner should have been over. You even justified walking out at that point in my book. He went on to say, I know that YouGov poll you cited said that 84% of women appreciate these small gestures of politeness, but I actually ran into someone in the 16% that doesn't appreciate them, apparently. Another great point. Yes, obviously, as I admitted in the episode, there are outliers everywhere. This is just one I have not encountered. And unfortunately, it does seem like a lot of men have. But I want to turn your attention to his response to this, which is something I noticed over and over and over again in the responses from quality men touching on this. And that is that his reaction was appropriate. He said, I won't let that situation deter me from being courteous and polite out in public, though. The world needs more of that, not less. Thank you. This is an actual rational male. All of us have encountered somebody who has behaved badly towards us in a given scenario. Most people who are healthy and well-adjusted do not then write off the entire demographic because of that incident, nor do we allow that incident to make us bitter and change our behavior and no longer treat the vast majority of humanity with kindness. Here's another example. This one says, so I'm a guy who actually had a crazy girl go off at me for holding open a door, but I did the same thing and just kept it as a funny story to tell later. Like I hold the door open for a lot of people and she was the only one who said anything. They are outlier cases and you are right. It is just a mislead to dodge the real questions. Thank you. Yes, exactly. I think men who hear about something like this happening, or maybe even, God forbid, have it happen to themselves and then allow it to make them bitter and project that one incident across all women, like you are looking for an excuse. Again, it's not a rational behavior to respond to something like that. Another person said, wow, you were totally correct about outliers. Outliers have pretended at being normal for years. Honestly, the only thing I've heard is don't call me ma'am. That is one that all of us have heard. I always laugh. I do think that's so weird. And I feel like if a woman has an issue with being called ma'am, it's because she has an issue with aging and she doesn't want to see herself as a ma'am. She's like, no, I'm just a little baby girl. What do you mean, ma'am? It's very pick me and very weird. I have seen that in the wild. But mostly when I was a kid, because my mom insisted upon manners. So I had to call all older people, even if they were like only 10 years older than me, Mrs., ma'am, sir, like that was a requirement. And I remember women who were like in their 20s and I would do that to them would be offended by that. Another person says, actually, I've personally been accused of sexism for holding a door open for a woman more than once. Keep in mind that I'll hold the door open for anyone because I happen to think it's polite. I said, that blows my mind. I'd like a word with these women. Where do you live? I mean, I really do want to know because I've lived in a lot of states, but as I was kind of like plotting out my course, most of them have been in the South. I've lived in Alabama. I've lived in Kentucky. I've lived in South Carolina. I've lived in Tennessee. I had a brief 6-month stint in New York, and then I was in Georgia. So while I travel pretty widely and while I have moved around a good bit, it is, there's always a chance I'm just in like a regional bubble. And he did say at that particular time that he was in Toronto. I don't know anything about Canadian women. I do think Toronto is a pretty left-leaning city. I also think Canada is more of a left-leaning country. So it wouldn't surprise me if you had more women that are of this mentality in those kinds of places, maybe. He went on to say, usually I would just get glares if it was at a mall, but there were at least 2 times I also was asked pointedly if I thought they couldn't do it themselves. I really do want a conversation with these women. If you're in my audience and you're one of these women, out yourself now. I want to analyze your brain. Like, of course, they know that you can open a door. That's never been the point of it. Are you daft? And it just makes me mad because not only is it rude to behave in this way towards someone who is trying to do something nice for you, not only does it increase the potential that toxic men will take that incident and project it across all women and use it as an excuse to treat women badly, it also means that men will increasingly be fearful about being chivalrous in public. And that means you're ruining things for all of the rest of us who would like to still live in a polite society. So please, isolate yourself if you're in this camp. You're exhausting. And then lastly, I'll turn your attention to a text conversation between our favorite attorney, Corbin, who was on my show a few weeks ago. That episode got a lot of attention too. He came on to talk about how the red pill narratives are seeping into America's court system. We love Corbin, so I always appreciate what he has to say. And he texted me and said he's been catching up on podcast episodes over the past week, and he listened to the episode on whether men or women are natural protectors. And he heard my point about men who complain about opening a door for a woman once and getting yelled at for it. And he said, I've actually had that happen to me twice. Last year, I remember hanging with a bunch of my friends and talking about this. 3 or 4 of the guys had this experience. Not all, but several. One of the older guys asked us how many of us were in college when this happened. We had to think about it, but that was the case for all of us. I know a couple of guys this happened to outside of college, but both were in the military and opened the door for a female in the military. I went on to ask him if these college settings were in the South, because again, I'm just trying to tell, is this a regional thing? And he says that his were, that Knoxville's kind of weird, which is true. I spent a lot of time in Knoxville going to football games when I lived in Nashville. And while it is a southern town, it is not a southern town. It's got a lot of implants in it. He made that point and said it's a southern town with an eclectic blend of people from all over. And he said, I think one of the other guys was in Nashville, but I can't speak to the others. And that's when I said, okay, I've now heard from enough quality men I trust on this subject. I'm going to have to circle back and deal with these women. He made a really poignant point, though, of course, because this is Corbyn. He said, I think college is a time a lot of us try to explore and figure ourselves out. That often leads to us exploring more extremist iterations of things. He said, I could see some women maybe getting a little too into feminism and thinking they needed to snap a guy's head off for being courteous or chivalrous. He went on to note that he hasn't had it happen since, even though he's a lawyer and is constantly opening doors for women, including female lawyers who happen to be pretty feminist. And I think that actually makes a lot of sense. Women who behave this way, I'm going to bet on average, are very, very young and still like stretching their legs, trying to figure out their place in the world, maybe took a feminism 101 course and are overreacting to what they've been told. They're kind of like little boys who go out and they're all excited to start lifting weights for the first time. And then they try to like lift these crazy, huge, massive weights and they get crushed. That's how I envision these women. I'm going to have to assume their brains are not fully formed. And if they are, if this is grown women doing this, those women are either very mentally ill, they have been through something pretty traumatic with men that they need to go deal with and not push it out onto society. And I really think at the end of the day, if they are repeatedly acting this way throughout their lives, they're just people we need to leave alone. I cannot discount the fact that there are simply some bad people. There are some men who just hate women. There are some women who just hate men. I'm not really interested in psychoanalyzing that too far past what I just said about getting some help if you've had bad, really significant traumatic incidents with somebody of the opposite gender. But past that, you need to grow up and get a grip. And if you're not going to do that, then these kinds of people really should just be avoided. It's not normal or natural to hate or look down on an entire group of people. The proper way to deal with outliers is exactly how many of these men have modeled in the comments. That was weird, didn't like that, inappropriate, but I'm not going to let it change me and my behavior and turn me into a bad person. And I'm also not going to let it skew how I view a whole demographic. And just to show that I really am trying to like put myself in the shoes of some of these people, I had a recent incident where like this was tested, right? This is something I believe. This is something I've exercised in the past. I've preached on it. But when you have somebody do something really, really crappy to you, it does test your limits. So for the sake of illustrating that, I'll share this story, which is that I have been in the process of selling one of my houses now that my husband and I have gotten married and combined. And I went through this very lengthy process earlier this summer where the house was under contract and the person who was going to buy it was being the most. I'm talking about nonstop calls and texts asking for really ridiculous things in the negotiations. It had been a hard 2 months just dealing with them. And when we got down to the closing date, they pulled out of nowhere, started making up malicious lies about me, threatening to sue me, even though they had no grounds and every single bit of Georgia law was against them. And ultimately, it was settled and I got the escrow money and it's fine now, but it was very, very anxiety inducing for me. I already have an anxiety disorder. Somebody threatening to sue you, even when you know you're in the right, knowing what I know about America's legal system, which is super litigious and in which somebody can sue you for virtually nothing. And even though they have no grounds and they're in the wrong, you still have to spend the money to defend yourself. And even if you win, you may or may not be able to recoup those costs, especially if they're a crazy person who has no money. So I was on the verge of a brain aneurysm. And like I said, fortunately, it all worked out. But during that time period, it did come to my attention that the woman I was dealing with was a recent immigrant from China who was coming here to buy a house. And for a split second, it really made me feel very sour about the Chinese and about Chinese people. And I had to really check that within myself and be like, no, Chinese people did not do this to you. The nation of China did not do this to you. This is one individual who happens to be coming from China who is doing this to you. And I just think that that's something more people need to exercise within themselves. I get the impulses, okay? Our brains are often programmed to be very tribalistic and to operate in this way. But if you are an enlightened person who is in a first world country and who's had an education, you need to be able to check that within yourself and reprogram your mentality. So all that to say, to the men who have had this experience with women on behalf of women, I am very sorry, and I'm very sorry that I made fun of you and did not believe you. It turns out this actually is happening. And again, send me their names. I would love to have a conversation with these women on your behalf. Okay, next up. On my episode, Are Women Afraid to Vote Differently Than Their Husbands?, I addressed a narrative that the Kamala camp has been pushing heavily, even recently releasing this controversial commercial since my episode came out.
Your turn, honey.
In the one place in America where women still have a right to choose, you can vote any way you want.
Now, in my episode, I explored the ways that women's voices and votes have historically been oppressed, the growing animosity towards women's votes from some men on the right who feel entitled to them, and the argument that married women are more likely to vote conservative than their peers. But I'll admit that I remained incredulous at the notion that a large chunk of women might find themselves in such positions now due to the gains that we've had in feminism, more egalitarian relationships, just the propensity for people to date based off of political persuasions from the beginning, and downward marriage trends. But it seems I may have been in a bit of a bubble on this one too. Again, I'll direct you to my comment section. One person said, can't speak for current generations for the most part, but I remember my grandmother saying she just voted how my grandfather voted. She wasn't threatened at all, but she didn't feel like she could go against what he said. Another person said, I actually covered my mom once because my dad was kind of trying to force her to vote the same as him, which was SGP. I'm not familiar with this, but they said that is a Christian conservative party that didn't even allow women on their voting list because women shouldn't lead. That tracks. I said, if women shouldn't lead, you should be consistent, so mom shouldn't vote at all because voting is a form of leadership as well. When I said that, she could vote what she wanted and knew he just wanted a double vote. I knew SGP is dependent on the female vote, which is pretty ironic. Maybe because women were mostly more religious than their husbands, while religious husbands want their women to vote the same like them. So that's why I think they are not yet fighting against women's voting rights if you can force your wife and unmarried daughters to vote like you. And she's not wrong. This is something I have heard amongst more cultish, extreme forms of Christianity, that basically women and daughters should vote like the husband, but they are for women's rights to vote because they want to basically procreate a lot and then add to their voting numbers, which, put a pin in that. I'm going to circle back to it in just a moment. I also saw a lot of comments that were just very icky from men in this video. Here's one example. The guy says, no, but Lord, sometimes I think the rest of us would be better off if some of them were. Grotesque. Another person said, I had female patients who were afraid their husbands would find out they got the jab in 2021. So ... As I pointed out, there is all the difference in the world between somebody having a different opinion than their spouse and being actually afraid of their reaction if they find out they took some action based on those differences in opinions. I also want to say there were a couple comments that hit points I didn't think to make. Man, I hate it. I hate it when that happens, when somebody comes through with like a really good point in the comments and I'm like, why didn't I think to say that? Especially when it's something I've actually thought before and just forgot, like in the scope of writing my outline to include. This is one, though, that I didn't have as a natural thought, so I'm going to read it for you because I thought he made a really good point. He said, also, married women have a few additional factors that make them more likely to vote conservative. They are more likely to live in suburban or rural areas. They're economically better off, and they're more likely to be white, which that's a really good point when we're talking about whether married women, or the reasons, I guess, why married women tend to lean more conservatively. I touched on a number of factors that I thought could influence that, but I forgot to include that, which is pretty substantial. Now, not only did I hear from several women about these situations, some of which I can share publicly, some of which I cannot, but I did hear from a number of women over the past couple of days on this front. But in conjuncture with that feedback I was receiving, I also saw this tweet go absolutely viral on Twitter over the past couple of days. This is a man named Dale Partridge, and he said, in a Christian marriage, a wife should vote according to her husband's direction. He is the head and they are one. Unity extends to politics. This is not controversial. Yes, it is, buddy. Somebody quote tweeted him and said, I'm seeing people scoff at the ad showing the wife privately voting against her husband's wishes. Quote, it's so patronizing to women. Quote, nobody has a marriage like that. Just a reminder, this guy has 113,000 followers and there are more like him. That's a great point, and many of those followers were agreeing with him and outing themselves in his comments. Here's one that says, even better, the household should just be given one vote, which is submitted by the patriarch. And he said, yes, household voting is the way. Like, major yikes. I liked this point by Rebecca on Twitter. She said, this is why young women are fleeing the church in droves. Pretty soon there will be no Christian marriages because women won't put up with this. This doesn't sound much better than Islam. And I think this is such a great point. I often measure things like this. Like, how would we respond if somebody who was Muslim said something very similarly? And it would not be taken well. as it shouldn't be. This is very sexist, very misogynistic, very anti-human, very bigoted, and has fundamentally nothing to do with Christianity. People who think like this are in a cult. And I do think this is why you see women increasingly leaving the church while men are lately more attracted to it, because too often organized religion is offering men a structure that allows them to be domineering, gives them control, allows them to put people beneath them and make them subservient. And for a lot of seedy men who can't and don't possess that actual leadership and can't exercise it out in society, they're very attracted to an organization that promises them that kind of hierarchy. But similarly, women are not attracted to it. And even women who were raised in it, like me, are increasingly recognizing the ways that sexism has been baked into the church. Even the denomination I grew up in, which is very mainstream, Southern Baptist, they believe that women cannot be preachers, which is one reason I haven't been back to a Southern Baptist church since I've been out on my own. And I've had this conversation with my parents. I think it's laughable. I've often said to them, show me one man that's a better leader than I am, that's done more with their life than I have, that has gotten more accomplished, that has formed coalitions, that has overturned laws, that has managed to get people to willingly follow them. I'm not saying they don't exist, but I'm saying that to say that a woman is inherently not capable of leading because of their gender is disgusting and wrong and easily disproven just with two eyes open. So yeah, a lot of women are starting to dismantle these arguments in the deconstruction movement, and they're either moving to newer kinds of denominations that are not preaching this kind of crud, or they're trying to practice their faith outside the constructs of a church or an organized religion. It is worth emphasizing that the vast majority of men responding to him did disagree with him. Here's one person pushing back that says, good luck with that, with a lot of laughing face emojis. I seriously wouldn't even want a wife that couldn't think independently. I would be repulsed by such a thing. Thank you. True masculinity here. True masculinity, true leadership, true strength does not need somebody to be weak or stupid in order to feel powerful or smart. It's just losers who feel that way. And I know that in the context of this whole discussion, there are often people who just say, this is just a few fringe people online. This is just your algorithm. This is just like a small pocket of losers online. Yes, I do agree with that. But that doesn't mean that you sweep it under the rug. I think that's often the impulse, particularly among people on the right and among evangelicals, because they don't want to be forced to confront the ickiness in their midst. They don't want to be associated with it. They don't want to have to think about it, but they also do not want to have to confront it and stand up to it, because they have this driving desire to be popular. They constantly feel like they are the second-class citizens, the second-class groups, and they just desperately want to be popular, desperately want to attract more people to their movements. They're like the kids that are just really trying to vie to get a seat at the popular kids table. So they don't want to do the hard work of calling out this crud, dealing with it, and pushing it outside of their movement. But I think that that's moronic, because just because something that is seedy is small in numbers does not mean it will not spread. Fringes can still have a massive outsized impact. I mean, take Trump as one example. He only has about 30% of the GOP that is rabidly in his corner and just like loves what he thinks. But that 30% has been able to dominate and overtake and throw out the principles of the GOP and reinstate it with new contradictory principles over the past decade. So don't tell me these things don't matter. That's just an excuse to not deal with it because you don't have the courage to. As Rebecca on Twitter again pointed out, many are beginning to recognize the growing radical fringe on the right, but insist they are small in numbers and of no concern. Progressives are actually only 6% of the population and have a significant amount of institutional power. Remember, numbers do not equal power. If the radical left can take over, the radical right can do the same, and you won't like one over the other. Hear, hear. So yeah, all that to say, apparently I was off base on being incredulous that this might still be happening. And since I do have a lot of women in my audience, particularly women that come from conservative evangelical backgrounds, I want to reiterate that this is abusive behavior. Controlling, dominating behavior and treating someone like a second-rate citizen is a precursor for more serious abuse, and it is still damaging on its face. It is also a perversion of Christianity that I've heard far too much of, even growing up in mainstream denominations, and it's not okay. And to the men, because I've seen some men push back in the comments too and say more men are afraid to tell their wives, or more men are fearful of their wives if she finds out how they're voting. I would just say I really can't tell if you're being serious or facetious. But if you are being serious, The reverse is also true. If you actually do feel in danger from your partner disclosing these things, that is an abusive situation and it's not okay. All right, so to wrap up this episode, since I spent most of it admitting where I was wrong, I thought I'd do a fun comment section calling out my trolls in the comments for where they were wrong. For what it's worth, I am still figuring out this new daily episode structure. I've been having a lot of fun with it so far. I'm trying to figure out what works best, what you guys like. I know people tend to like hearing some of the comments, but right now I'm doing a lot of experimentation just to see what works best, both for content and just for having to get in hair and makeup every day, guys. That's really been the worst part of expanding to a 5-day production schedule is I hate being in hair and makeup. My husband has convinced me that I am so much prettier without makeup. And now I believe him and I just don't like fixing up anymore. It's so much work. Anyways, I could rant on and on about how much of their lives women lose to having to get in hair and makeup. It drives me nuts. So anyways, aside from that though, I am figuring out the content structure that works best. So give me feedback. I'd love to hear what you're liking, what you'd like to see more of, what you felt like wasn't as good of a use of your time. You can weigh in both in the YouTube comments and also if you're listening on audio, you can weigh in by leaving a review. I would love to hear your thoughts too. So to start off, we're going to discuss some comments that were left in relation to my video a couple of days ago where I talked about Trump's unhinged ideas of repealing the income tax, which he cannot do, and replacing it with tariffs, which he can and will do, and why that would be an economic disaster. Trump made these comments to Joe Rogan in his recent interview, and so I did a deep dive into the actual econ policy behind it, and as you might suspect, the Trumpers were big mad. I got this one a lot. She knows nothing about economics, even though I just ranted in depth on economics for 25 minutes in this video. I responded and said, I do, and I don't think you have an argument. He said, facts don't require arguments, which I honestly might frame that as one of the dumbest comments I've ever heard online. This is phenomenally stupid. Another lady said, if you can't get behind the idea, get out of reporting on politics. That would be a win for Americans. If you can't get behind my candidate, you better just not even be in media. Either you're for them or you're against them. And if you're against them, you have no place talking about economics or the truth or any other factors that I might not like. This guy said, you may want to open an economics book because I wrote that entire episode without reading an economics book. He said, you don't know what you're talking about. I responded to him and said, this is a hilarious thing to write because you can't actually argue with me. I just went deeper on economics than either candidate could. Furthermore, my take on tariffs are one of the few things economists across the political spectrum agree on. I have studied econ. You apparently went to clown school though. Wait, it gets even better. Then he said, you're, Y-O-U-R, way off base. I said it would be your, Y-O-U''re. I see we skip grammar school as well as econ school. You guys, my haters can never read or spell, okay? To this day, I don't think I've encountered one. I've been saying for, probably close to a decade now, I deserve smarter haters, and I stand by that. I deserve smarter haters. What is this? I'm not wrong here on this, okay? You don't have to like it, but my point on tariffs is one of the few things that economists across the political spectrum actually agree on. They agree on very little because economic science is heavily biased oftentimes, and people are operating from different schools of thought. And most of the universities in America teach Keynesian economics, which is trash and utter garbage, but it has had tremendous impacts both on our culture and on our government. So that's what we're operating with. But even Keynesian economists, even far left economists, Marxists, whatever you want, they mostly have to agree with the Austrian economists, which is more the camp I'm in, which, by the way, I'd love to hear any of these haters and detractors just briefly define those schools of thought for me. Okay, we'll see who knows econ. But they have to agree that tariffs are bad. In the long run, they stifle competition, they stifle innovation, and they stifle overall economic growth. They also raise the cost of imported goods, and those costs then get passed directly to consumers in the form of higher prices, therefore reducing their purchasing power and overall economic welfare. They also, by the way, harm domestic industries by raising the cost of imported inputs that companies need, even if it's American made, to make their goods and services, therefore reducing efficiency and disrupting supply chains. And then lastly, they often lead to retaliatory tariffs. Imagine that from other countries. Yeah, if you stick a tariff on a country, they're probably going to stick it back on you, which can obviously hurt our own exports and disrupt global trade. So you guys need to take a seat. There is Within both the far left and right, there is a substantial number of people who can no longer actually hear policies anymore. They're not capable of listening to policy discussions or debates. They aren't capable of processing facts. They just have a broken monkey tribal brain that can just go like rah, 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 rah for one side or the other. And it's on full display. This person said, "You clearly have TDS. He talks about cutting government all the time. You are only hearing what you want." I really think me, the person who spends probably 60 hours a week researching and creating content around public policy and politics, is very well aware of what's being said and what's not being said, and probably has a little bit more understanding of what the policies being introduced are. If you think somebody has TDS because they rightfully call out an asinine economic proposal from a candidate, you're the one with TDS. This is what the two-party system has done to people's brains, and it's only going to get worse as the parties become more extreme and as the government gets even bigger. The stakes are too high, and these people are all nuts. And most of the people affiliating with them, it's all due to branding. It really has nothing to do with policy. They're given like some key buzzwords like hope, change, or like deregulation, and they just like walk around like the Walking Dead regurgitating those catchphrases without ever bothering to notice that the policies actually being proposed and introduced do not match those slogans. I like this point someone made on Twitter that says people often shout, "What's the solution?" when they hear critiques that fundamentally challenge their worldviews. They aren't looking for an actual understanding. They are looking for a reason to dismiss the critique so they can get rid of the dissonance that they feel. Fully on display. Aside from some of these more laughable comments on Trump and his tariffs, I also have noticed something on YouTube. So I've been like loosely on YouTube for a couple of years, but not really. Like I've had some people managing my social media that would like throw up clips from my podcast and things like that. But I haven't been really doing YouTube until this year. And so I'm still kind of getting to know the platform and feel my way around it. But one thing that has stuck out to me that I don't see on any other platform I have built followings on is the number of what I think are bots on literally every single episode, sometimes before the video even starts. I am getting a number of comments from bots. They aren't real people. They are always written in badly broken English, and they're always trying in their broken English to like diss me for making pro-female content. They're always trying to like make red pill arguments, but again, the grammar's so bad you can't even read them. And they'll reference like various red pill grifters like Pearl or like, I don't keep up with all their names, some of those other men. And I just think it's weird. I'm curious if any of the rest of you have noticed this on YouTube. YouTube in particular. I have said for a while, I feel strongly that the gender war online is being driven by foreign influences. I really think that if we are able to follow the money and see where it goes, it's going to trace back to that. That what has happened in the past couple of years is not organic. It's not an organic movement. It's very unnatural. And again, most of the accounts you see spreading it and cheering it on are not real people, as best I can tell. So something's up. Here's an example of just a few of them on a recent video. And again, these were being made before the video even went live. They're just spamming. It's very odd. Somebody responded to me and pointed out this really wouldn't be surprising. We just got a recent federal investigation into a number of far-right influencers online who very much appear to have been taking Russian money and not only pushing like pro-Russia narratives, but also, interestingly, being some of the key people on Twitter who were pushing things like repeal the 19th Amendment. So yeah, let me know what you think. Let me see if you've noticed this on other channels. I'm very curious and I want to dig into this deeper. I'm not sure exactly how to figure out where the funding might be coming from, but if you've got ideas, I'm open to them. All right, guys, I hope you like this episode. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to my channel if you've not already, and if you want even more content, you can follow me on Instagram, Twitter, or TikTok.